And welcome to a VSA Capital video blog. And I'm delighted today to have Paul Atherley with us. Morning, Paul. How are you?
Morning, Andrew. Very well. Sitting in the Islington sunshine. If you can't see me, I'm being bleached out by this dazzling southern winter sun. It's beautiful.
We can definitely see you, and we're looking forward to what you've got to say as well. And I'm down in what is known as the Cornish lair. And I dare say I'll somehow bring Cornwall into this conversation, because of course today we're talking about your role as non-exec chairman of Alkemy Capital, which has recently announced a feasibility study for its main purpose, which is the Tees Valley Lithium hydroxide plant. So maybe just to kick us off, Paul, why don't you sort of briefly explain what it is you're building on, sorry, did I say Thames Valley? Tees Valley. Goodness me, what a terrible mistake. Tell us all about it.
Well, the background to this, as you and I discussed many times, is the reality is we can dig minerals out of the ground, whether it be rare earths or lithium. But at the end of the day, all goes to China to be processed. And China controls 95% of the rare earth market. And I think it's well over 90% of the lithium hydroxide market. So with both Pensana and now more recently with Alkemy, we're looking to address that. As we were just chatting before, Pensana is very, very close to breaking ground on the Salten Chemicals Park separation facility in the UK in a Freeport. And it'll do for rare earths what we're now looking to do in Alkemy for lithium. And what it is that if you think about it, I'm not sure what the percentage is, a very, very high proportion of lithium comes from lithium spodumene, which is a concentrate, which only has about 6% lithium in it. So here we are trying to decarbonize the electric vehicle, the transport system with electric vehicles, but we're shipping 6% waste around the world loading up the shipping industry with waste, and the shipping industry is already 3% of the world's carbon emissions. So it makes no sense. So what a lot of companies are doing, particularly the Australian companies, they're saying, no, we need to go one step further. Let's go to a lithium sulfate, a primary lithium sulfate, or primary lithium phosphate in the case of Pilbara Minerals. And what we're doing is the chemistry bits, is the chemical engineering, which is what I've talked about before, the UK is really good at. So we're building that back end of that circuit. It's the lithium hydroxide, it's the crystallization part of the circuit. And we're leaving all the mineral processing at the mine site. So instead of sending out a lithium spodumene 6%, we're sending a lithium sulfate, which is anywhere between 30 and 50% lithium. So it makes a lot more sense. And Alkemy is looking to build a very, very big plant, 96,000 tons per annum of lithium hydroxide. The demand is off the scale. To give you some idea, the installed electricity capacity in the UK is 65 gigawatts. The number of gigafactories, the cumulative capacity that's being touted, is over 700 gigawatts. In other words, 10 times the size of the installed capacity of electricity generation in the UK in total. But there's no lithium hydroxide for it yet. There's no lithium. All that lithium hydroxide has to come from somewhere else. So we're building a plant that will do 96,000 tons per annum, which will feed into a market which is at least 500,000 tons per annum and growing. So a very, very exciting time.
Oh, Paul, it's a fantastic description of the macro picture, which, no one can argue with at all. But just explain perhaps, Alkemy, currently you're listed on the standard listing of the London Stock Exchange. You are what would be deemed as a small company. And yet this appears to be what I describe as a big company game. How come the likes of Ineos or Johnson Matthey or Umicore, why aren't they doing that? What is the advantage that you have that allows you to do this and not them? You obviously mentioned Pensana, you have effectively done it once already. But what are the other key ingredients that allow Alkemy and you to do this?
We don't know why Ineos, Johnson Matthey and Umicore have not stepped into this sector, and maybe they will. But we like to think of ourselves in the same way as Pensana is a first mover. So we basically saying we learnt what the inherent advantages are in the UK of these chemical parks from Pensana. Pensana has got the Salten Chemicals Park. It's a plug and play for chemical plants without the charismatic CEO and the free beer, and it's hooked into, will be hooked into ultimately private wire, offshore wind, and this inherent chemical engineering skill set that exists in the UK. So I keep making that point, is this is about chemical engineering. It's not about mineral processing. The miners do the mineral processing, take it to the highest value they can in country. And then we do what Alkemy at Tees Valley Lithium is looking to do, is to do the chemical engineering and feed supply into the cathode active materials market. And just to give you some example of the difference, you know, a primarily lithium sulfate, as I mentioned, will be somewhere between 30 and 50% lithium. When you're supplying a cathode active material maker, you've got to be 99.999% and consistent over a long period of time. That's chemical engineering, not mineral processing.
Let's look at the marketplace a little bit. I mean, I think that you know, you've got, with your lithium hydroxide plant, you've got two ends to it. You've got the product coming in and customers taking it off at the other side. The customers taking it off you, I think, are fairly obvious. I mean, it's the automotive EV industry. Europe's clearly going to be huge for that. So you're clearly going to have a huge customer base who must be, you know, jumping up and down with excitement and sending you cases of champagne, Paul, for doing this. But let's just turn to the other end, and that is that, you know, where are you? I mean, I take your point, you're bringing in a lithium sulfate, a much more concentrated product rather than just the, you know, the 6% spodumene, but you've still got to ship it from all around the world. Have you got, for want of a better word, the offtake contracts to start putting feedstock into your plant?
No, we haven't. The plant has got 4 trains. Each train is 26,000 tons per annum. And so we're in conversations with miners for each miner to have a single train. So we're in conversation with quite a few miners. Obviously it's confidential, but no, we definitely haven't signed up any feedstock contracts, but those conversations have been going now for well over 12 months. And the way to think about it is, if you're a junior miner and you're developing a spodumene mine, or you're in production, currently 100% of your revenue stream goes to China, and often to one customer. So it makes sense for what we call their expansion capacity, or their uncommitted capacity, because very few of them committed 100%. They're normally committed somewhere around 50 or 60%. So of that uncommitted capacity or their expansion capacity, we're saying you only need to commit 160,000 tons of spodumene per annum to produce 40-odd thousand tons of primarily the lithium sulfate, which will then go into a single train and produce 26,000 tons of lithium hydroxide. So no, categorically, we don't have any feedstock signed, but yes, we've been in lengthy discussions with some fairly obvious candidates, and that's something that Alkemy will be looking to do over the next few months, is sign them up and announce those feedstock contracts.
Well, and also, of course, Paul, as you know, having a conversation with me, often we talk about either Gulf or Cornwall, and I am in Cornwall. And I mean, I think what is becoming clear is that actually we potentially got a lot of lithium down in Cornwall, in the old English China clay pits. The mica is very rich in lithium, and we've currently got British Lithium looking at setting up an operation. We've got Cornish Lithium, which you have a lot of PR on, potentially setting up an operation, and Imerys, who actually own the English China clay pits, are a French conglomerate. I mean, you must be talking to them. You must be hopeful that there's a deal to be cut there to take your to take the Cornish lithium to Tees Valley to process it at the last stage. I mean, how are the conversations there, and how do you see that?
Well, first of all, you made a touch on a good point, is that we've talked about spodumene to this point. I mean, it's very obvious. This is a very, very obvious step for spodumene producers to go one step further. It's not quite so obvious if you're producing a lithium carbonate, but the conversations we're having with people is they will struggle on the mine site to produce a on-spec lithium carbonate that can go into the battery industry. So with conversations we're having with the carbonate producers is, we can take your off-spec, sub-spec, or non-battery grade product into Tees Valley and process that. So I think, given that the products out of Cornwall are unlikely to be spodumene, in fact, I'm sure they're not, they're going to be, Andrew, other products, then yes, to the extent that they're not able to go all the way to battery grade material, then yes, it makes sense for them to do a deal with us rather than send it all the way to China.
And for people who aren't be up to speed on lithium hydroxide, I mean, there's a key point, isn't there, of almost taking it from what I describe as 98 to 99.9. I mean, battery lithium has to be very high grade, very, very pure. You can't have a lot of impurities. So that final bit is absolutely vital, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, I'm learning on this, and all our team are chemical engineers, so they come from this industry, and they talk about the ambient conditions, meaning the dust in the air can be a problem. So, this is why you don't have lithium hydroxide plants on mine sites, because it's, as I said, my mineral processing is high vis and hard hats. Chemical engineering is lab coats and computers. So it's a completely different industry, and that's why you build these plants in chemical parks where you've got all those facilities. So we do think Cornwall, and there are other companies in the UK looking at brines. We think that ultimately the place where their product can go to will be Tees Valley Lithium, rather than shipping it all the way to China.
Yeah, and obviously this is the UK at the moment is sort of waking up to the whole battery industry, and we're seeing people like Glencore start to build gigafactories. The UK government, I think, actually is waking up to the fact that we need these capabilities, which is good news. Hopefully they'll wake up even more. Are you getting good government support, not necessarily from a financial point of view, but I mean, just in general encouragement? And yes, and it could be a case that, yes, we will help you with tax breaks and things, because another question on top of that is, power at the moment is incredibly expensive in this country, causing a lot of issues. You're not up and running yet, so hopefully it'll come back down again. But maybe there's two questions there. Can you make the economics in that respect work?
Two really good questions. And I was in Aberdeen on the weekend when Pensana was invited to present to the US-UK trade dialogue, basically the free trade talks. And we were top table as of one of the probably the most key discussion point was resilience to supply chains. Exactly to your point. This is, they weren't talking net zero. They weren't talking all of these other things. They were saying, following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, people are now evaluating basic things like food, like critical minerals, and saying, how do we make our supply chain resilient? So we had an opportunity to present to government, and had some very, very good conversations with the Secretary of State, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, and her US counterpart, Ambassador Kai, and they're very much all over that. So yes, government's now becoming aware, almost belatedly. And then the second point you make is about the tax breaks and incentives and power. Well, both Pensana and Alkemy are looking at free ports. And Pensana led the bid with Associated British Ports for Humber, which was the most successful free port bid. And what free ports are, there are two components. One is a maritime enterprise zone. So to your point, there's all sorts of business tax relief and incentives to locate your business there. And there's the second bit, which is not being resolved yet, which is the customs zone. You can bring things in tax-free and export tax-free. But on your final point, which is the really most exciting point, Hitachi this week have just announced that they are laying the high voltage DC cable from Dogger Bank to 2 locations, and this is this offshore wind. There's this 50 gigawatts of offshore wind that's coming on 2 cables. One cable's going, guess where, to basically Salten, basically Humber, and the other one's going to, guess where, Teesside. So what we've been saying all along is private wire connections to battery on the end of HVDC cables from offshore wind is the future. And you remember that there are times when that offshore wind generates negative electricity prices. So what you do is you capture those negative electricity prices in storage, okay, short-term 4-hour storage, and then you use it in a continuous feed into your plant. So the answer to the high prices is exactly what the British government's doing, exactly what's happening offshore UK. It's one of the reasons why we've got this brilliant location, these fantastic chemical parks located right next door to the world's biggest energy installation on the planet, that is offshore wind in the North Sea, being connected by single high voltage DC cables. And this isn't something in the future. Those cables are being laid now. So it's really, really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, you're obviously at feasibility study stage at the moment, so also you've got a little bit of time, hopefully, for things to settle down. But also, just you when you actually get into building the plant, your first stage is slightly different from your last stage, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Well, just on the points about feasibility, we're not sure about this whole story about feasibility. Is that in Pensana we went from what's called class 4 straight to feed and straight to finance and build. You know, companies that spend 2 years doing feasibility study, all they're doing really is improving the risk factor, the variability from sort of 25% to 15%, and that's really to satisfy the bankers. If you've already decided your process route and you're already within a chemicals park, you don't need to spend 2 years and $5 or $10 million on a feasibility study, because you've got known equipment suppliers into a known infrastructure. So we'll go from class 4 straight into feed. In fact, we're already talking to EPCM contractors, etc. So we don't have that big long delay that you would normally have. So sorry to jump down your throat on that, but I keep on getting pushed back to me. When's the feasibility study come out? And I'm saying never. We're doing feed. You finance off feed, not feasibility study. Sorry.
But I mean, I'm just picking up on one point there. I mean, are you finding that, for instance, you're going to be using a lot of steel at the moment? There's a lot of movement, which is logistics.
Yes,
I mean, your costs at the moment are probably looking a little bit hairy, aren't they?
Yes, that's right. So what Pensana's done is locked in all the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 feed packages. So you have to do that, otherwise you end up getting cost escalation. And to be honest, Andrew, they'll only lock in for a certain period of time. So Alkemy is nowhere near that stage yet. We've got to go through that process and we've already seen some cost inflation that's already baked into the numbers. But to your question about the process routes, is the first process route we're looking at is almost certainly going to be a conventional causticization route. But trains 2, 3, and 4, we are looking to tap into this offshore wind, this cable, and have an electrochemical route. And the exciting thing about that is if we can get a low carbon footprint into the lithium hydroxide, this is exactly what the cathode active material makers want. Because ultimately, when you buy cars in Europe, they're going to have an embedded carbon signature, embedded carbon number in it. That's going to be the behavioral economics that's going to drive carbon out of the system. So the European Union has already made that clear with the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So if we can sell a product that is low carbon and it's on the doorstep of the cathode active material makers, we are looking at potential premiums, we think, into the hydroxide.
Well, I mean, right now, I mean, it's great to get a premium right now. Of course, actually, the prices are very high. That you're probably pretty happy with the price anyway. And of course, I guess just it's worth mentioning, because most people have noticed now that the lithium price has gone absolutely through the roof from about $6,000 to $70,000. That doesn't really affect you, does it? Because you're a part of the process. You know, what comes in goes out simply with a premium added on. So you're not too worried about that, presumably.
No, so we're more like a merchant processor. So as you saw in the announcement, we use long-term $25,000 US a ton for our, which we think is the long-term price. But as a merchant processor, we are much more like an INEOS or a Johnson Matthey. We just get them a healthy margin on the way through.
Yeah. So just finally, let's turn a little bit towards the stock, Alkemy. You know, and any investor looking at it, because you're obviously at some stage you're going to need to raise money. In fact, you're going to need to raise lots of money at some stage. But I guess you're looking at a very similar model to the way you've taken Pensana. It's slightly different, obviously, but where you're growing it, and shareholders obviously did extremely well. But I mean, well, first of all, is that the sort of concept you're looking at? I mean, what, as an investor, presumably you should be looking at this. Look, we'll make a small raise to get things going, and then we'll bring in bigger raises, but we'll bring in other people, and presumably you may well bring in corporates as well. I mean, it's interesting because we're talking about why aren't some of the other corporates doing it. Yesterday, Johnson Matthey, what looks like could be a predator, has taken 5%, and maybe that's why they're not quite focused on what's happening in the UK. And of course, Jim Ratcliffe's busy trying to bid for Chelsea, I think, overnight. So he's a little bit busy. So maybe you're going to get going on this, raise it, and then they're going to come in and take you out, and everyone's going to make an awful lot of money. Is that how you see it? Well,
that's going to your first point about how we're going to do the capital structure. Yes, we've absolutely learned off what Pensana did. Pensana went from equivalent, 5 million US, to £3 million to 300 million pounds, and over 2-3 years, and that was by keeping the capital structure really tight, exactly as you were saying, Andrew, and also having some fantastic shareholders and a great management team. So we're building out the management team in Alkemy, and we've appointed, obviously, yourselves. And we think by bringing in investors who, I've talked about this many times, if you have engaged investors who understand the story, understand why they're holding the stock. They are the best advocates for the story. They'll buy more and they'll go forward. So that's the model. In terms of the actual funding, it'll be very much along the lines of the Pensana model. Initially, it will be high net worth investors like your clients, and then we'll gradually bring in the institutional investors. Then we'll institutionalize the stock, and then what Pensana is doing is we've announced is out in the bond market. So Pensana is doing big chunky green bonds. So I see no reason why Alkemy can't go down that same route. You know, I think it's a well-trodden path, well understood, and London's the best place for it. I think you know, it's interesting actually. Just we talked about it. You know, Australia's can rev up junior stocks really well, and they get up to huge market caps. But ultimately, when you want to grow the company from that point, you need the much bigger investors, and you need access to the corporate market, the bond market. Well, the beauty of being a London listed company from word go, you've got no transition period. You don't have to transition from an ASX company to a standard list. You know, that's one of the reasons why Alkemy is so exciting. It's starting on the standard list and with a journey clearly mapped out.
Look, I mean, obviously we are advising you, and we are very excited about what you're doing. There's no question of doubt that Britain could do with this business, Europe could do with this business, the West could do with this business. I mean, there's going to be an awful lot of interest, Paul, on what you're doing here. There are an awful lot of interested parties that need you to be successful, and I'm probably going to give you a helping hand if it looks like you're going to need it. So look, I'm delighted to be working with you. I think that the next, you know, let's call it 5 years as the business, you go up to full scale, is going to be an incredibly exciting ride. For anybody watching this, if they want more information, please do get in touch with us at VSA or get in touch with Paul. There's going to be a lot of news, I think, coming out here, because this is a very fast moving industry, and it's a pleasure to talk to you, Paul. And now I'm going to let you get back on and carry on getting it up and going.
Thanks, I really appreciate that, and we look forward to hooking Cornwall into Teesside and creating that fantastic connection. Thank you very much for your support. Really appreciate it.